The views expressed in this video are solely those of the host and the guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of any organization or entity that may be affiliated with. We encourage the viewer to conduct their own research.
Hi there, and welcome to another episode of The Pack Breakers, a show dedicated to tobacco harm reduction and the people of tobacco harm reduction. Today's show is slightly different because in the past we've talked about vaping and safer nicotine alternatives. But today I want to touch on the regulations or the proposed bill and the process that this bill has taken on. And to help me share some of his views around this is Martin van Staden. Martin van Staden is the policy head for the Free Market Foundation, and we welcome him to the Pack Breakers. Good afternoon, Martin, and how are you, sir?
Thanks for having me, Kurt. It's great to be here. No, they're keeping us very busy with this bill. So it seems like everything is happening now. So we at the FMF are quite intensely involved with at this stage, really. I mean, we have big issues with the substance, and we'll get into that. But just the absolute abortion of a process that has been followed to adopt this legislation. It's not just about tobacco, but I mean, there's more fundamental questions about does the public in South Africa have any kind of entitlement to change how policy works out? And I think recent events around this bill show us not really, no. So yeah, you ask how am I? I'm a bit disheartened by how this is shaking out. But yeah, let's get into it.
So before we jump in, can you give us a little bit of a background who the Free Market Foundation is and your role within that foundation?
Absolutely, thanks. So the Free Market Foundation is celebrating its Golden Jubilee this year. So that means we're 50 years old. The FMF was founded in 1975, and its name, I think, will be very self-explanatory to many. We believe in a free market system in the economy, underpinned by classical liberalism, essentially the idea that each individual is entitled to decide for themselves, to make their own decisions without having to worry about the state inserting itself or criminals inserting themselves into their lives, determining for them what to do. Private property rights is a big part of that. The free enterprise system that has lifted so many out of poverty around the world in the last 50 years is a key aspect. And then I think most relevant today is probably our belief in this idea of limited government, the idea that the state doesn't exist to be our parent forever. We become adults at some stage, and then people should be able to decide for themselves, even if they make unpopular decisions, even if they make maybe offensive decisions. The state has to be limited to protecting people's lives and their liberty. And that's been what the Free Market Foundation has been doing for the last 50 years. We were big opponents of the apartheid system, believing very much that system was what we said at the time, a free way to communism, effectively kind of this idea that the state must determine everything, cradle to grave. And we're quite heartened by having a constitution in South Africa today that does, in fact, recognize people's freedom. But the government doesn't always adhere to that, and increasingly rarely adheres to that imperative. And that's what defines the FMF's work in our opposition to expropriation without compensation, in our opposition to South Africa's strict labor dispensation, but also, of course, that defines our work in this respect of tobacco control, regulating vaping, etc.
So you guys must be crazy busy given the legislative landscape at the moment.
It's insane.
So we're going to discuss the tobacco bill, and we all know that this was introduced in the beginning of 2018 by Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, and right from the onset, there was immediately, particularly from a harm reductionist like myself, a lot of things that was problematic. What do you see in the bill that you are concerned about, and maybe what the possible repercussions of if this bill is passed? I mean, we're still very early in the parliamentary phase of things, but if it eventually does pass, what do you think the repercussions of this particular bill would have on the individual, on industry, but also the precedents that it sets. I think that's a very important thing. There is a precedent that will be set here.
So our view is that this is effectively, not on paper, but effectively prohibitionist legislation. So it says that the minute that there's public health reasons, and these are the kind of parameters of how you can engage. But if you cut all of that away, what this bill does is it actually says that you are no longer allowed to smoke. Now, I'm not a smoker. Most of the people at the FMF are not smokers. I'm also not a vapor. I'm a teetotaler. But for me, the key aspect here is the principal question of people's freedom. And this bill is a complete and utter negation of that freedom, that ability to decide. And it goes so far in some provisions that it casually and almost nonchalantly criminalizes people smoking or vaping inside their own houses. And I don't quite understand how this hasn't become a big topic of public conversation. Because it's illegal. If this bill becomes an act, if you smoke in your house and your house is in any way, shape, or form used for employment, any kind, as a workplace is the word that is used. So that means that maybe once a week you have someone come and clean your house, sweep self, or someone who you've directly employed. Or if you work from home, if your home office is in your house, it is a workplace. And that means that if you smoke in your house, you have committed a crime, an offense in terms of this bill, if it's adopted. And you can be fined and you can go to prison. You can be arrested and go to prison for doing that, for smoking inside your own house. And then there's another provision that says if a vehicle is used in any way for work-related purposes, you may never again smoke in that vehicle. So if you drive to and from your office, that could in theory be considered that as a work-related purpose for that vehicle, and you could be criminalized from smoking inside your own car. So this bill is a deep incursion into people's civil liberties, and some people might say, but okay, it's limited to those things. You can go to, let's say, areas that have been designated as smoking areas. Not really. So there are at least two provisions. One relates to smoking, and one relates to sales of these products, smoking, tobacco, and vaping products, which gives the Minister of Health effectively the sovereign power to prohibit smoking or sales of these products anywhere. It says that the minister, at his discretion, if it's in interest of public health, may prohibit smoking or sales in designated areas. Effectively, that gives the minister the right to say, nowhere in South Africa may you smoke, and nowhere in South Africa may you purchase or sell cigarettes. So there is actually no limiting principle in this bill. It is, in substance, it is a prohibitionist measure that gives people like Aaron Motsoaledi the power, effectively, of what a country's mom or dad has, to say that you are my children, and I have decided that you're not allowed to make these lifestyle decisions. So that is what it does. You asked about precedent, and this is important because to some degree we already made the mistake of setting this precedent. So tobacco has long been controlled and regulated in South Africa. Alcohol has long been regulated in South Africa, and there are, I must say up front, there are of course public health reasons for why this is done, and all those reasons can be valid, while the liberal insight is also valid, and that is that once you, as adults, as civil society, say that we do not want to solve this problem through education, through information, through social and economic pressure, ostracism, we do not want to solve this problem. We are giving this authority, this power to the state to do on our behalf. Then you have made something of a generational mistake, because it's very difficult to roll back that succession of what I would say personal responsibility, family responsibility, community responsibility, because it does become a precedent. It does become a precedent. We see now it's been happening actually for a few years already, but we see now the clamp down on something like sugar. It's unhealthy. People get diabetes. They have to go to hospital. The state pays for a lot of people's healthcare, and therefore the state believes it is entitled to now regulate and tax, of course, sugar and any number of things that the state considers sinful. We call it sin taxes, these excise taxes. Smoking is probably the most popular thing. It's very difficult for me to convince ordinary people in South Africa that this is a bad idea, just because of the how smokers specifically, but the tobacco industry, have been made to be these evil kind of people who just want to harm society. To convince them that, listen, forget about that. There is a principle of freedom at stake here, which will not it hasn't stopped at smoking. It hasn't stopped at alcohol. It will not stop at sugar. It will go on to meat. I promise you, within the next generation, there will be a regulation of the consumption of meat, and forcing.
There's even a discussion around caffeine from the World Health Organization point of view.
There is no limiting principle. On the back of the WHO and many other, what I would say, busybodies around the world, because very few of these ideas are homegrown, but because of these busybody ideas that really emanate to some degree from the West, there is no limiting principle. As you say, caffeine, at some point, chairs are going to become a problem. People are sitting too much. You have to stand. There is no limiting principle. And what we at the Free Market Foundation say is, listen, we have to roll back some of this. The state has to protect our lives and our liberty and our property and ensure public order, but the state cannot be dictating in this kind of detail, like the tobacco bill represents, what adults do and ingest. And that's kind of the overarching substantive issue that we have with the tobacco bill.
Well, I think you touched on a very key point just earlier, talking about paternalism and, state being our parents, and we need to adhere to our parents' will. But the reality is that people who smoke are considered as the runt of the litter, for lack of a better word. They don't really care because there's all this coercive regulations and controls around people's choices of smoking. Most people who smoke started as teens doing stupid things, and most people will just continue into perpetuity until they become sick or die from smoking-related diseases. But our parent, the state, has not provided any kind of solution other than taxation and coercion regulations to help those individuals quit. And now we have a product or a suite of products that are proving to be significantly less harmful and helping those individuals move away from tobacco. So what I want to touch on now is that this bill has been, as you said, was introduced in 2018, and it went through this long process that just stumbled across and made some serious mistakes. I've written a couple of opinion pieces, and I know you have written a couple of opinion pieces talking about the process this has followed. Mine has always been about the public hearings. Can you add to that as to what was problematic with this process of the bill?
Yeah, absolutely. So we will, in the next month or so, be publishing a full and comprehensive report, at least up to the current moment, because lots of very bizarre and absurd things are still happening as you and I speak here today. But up to the current moment, we will publish a report that goes over this. But to take some examples, so there's something that has to kind of precede the public hearings and the kind of consultations. It's called a SIA, a socioeconomic impact assessment. So to just simplify, this is effectively a report on what will be the consequences and the costs and the benefits of adopting a particular policy. Now, this is not required by any act of parliament or by the constitution explicitly, but there is a government policy, a cabinet policy that says before we as cabinet will sign off on any new law and send it to parliament to be considered, we have to see a SIA. Now, a SIA did at some point kind of come about, and it was drafted in part, or at least facilitated in part, by some anti-tobacco academics and so forth. And what it comes down to is this bill is the best thing since peanut butter. It'll have no costs whatsoever, and the only costs are that the tobacco companies are going to be sad. And it will have all the benefits in the world. It's going to solve. It's going to take away. People are going to stop smoking en masse. It's going to be public health for everyone. That's the SIA. And this was now published, and now this informs the public hearings that followed. Now, of course, immediately you should see the issue of that. It's a completely dishonest thing to go to a largely policy uneducated public to. South Africa is not a society of a sophisticated understanding of public policy. So if you go to the public with nonsense like this, you're already lying to the public from the get-go. But then at the events itself, the public hearings, and this is not just the tobacco bill. Unfortunately, we see this with expropriation. We see this with labor law, and whenever there's new legislation being adopted, what happens is that they do a call for comments, written comments, to the parliamentary committee, or first to the department and then later to the parliamentary committee. If you submit something, as the Free Market Foundation did, that points out all the issues in the bill and says not just that we disagree with this for a matter of public policy and think that this is a better way or you shouldn't do this, not just that, but if you say, hey, there's a spelling error here, that comma is not in the right place, or there's some error of logic here, if you do that and you oppose the bill, they will ignore you completely and utterly. That is what happened at the public here, at the written submission stage of this process. Effectively, all the many thousands of submissions that said there's a problem here were swept aside effortlessly. So that was a box-ticking exercise, a complete formalistic compliance with, in this case, real constitutional mandates for Parliament and the government to engage in public participation around new legislation. So that's the written submission stage, and then later you can provide an oral submission to the same department or the committee. There was issues there as well, like the arbitrary requirement that if you did not say in your written submission that you would like to give a oral submission, then you are not allowed to attend. But again, same issue. If you go there, you sit for 20 minutes explaining in clear detail to the committee or to the department what the problem is, they will nod along. There might be some question from an opposition MP and so on. It goes nowhere if you oppose the bill. If you support the bill, they will very diligently note down how much you support the bill, and your name will appear in many reports saying that, we really have these people standing behind the bill. If you oppose it, your name might be mentioned, and they will just say that we do not agree with these comments. And then there's the public hearings. This is where the committee goes around the country to public halls and so forth, rented spaces, and brings in a lot of people to come and give their piece on the bill, presumably to inform the process. Now, this has always been a massive kind of sham, unfortunately, where the political parties that support the bill, and it's only the political parties that support the bill that do this, it's never the political parties that oppose the bill, but the parties that support the bill bring in busloads full of their supporters from around the country, locally, etc. And then the chairperson of the committee, who is almost invariably a member of the party that controls Parliament, the ANC in this case, and that is usually the party that has submitted and sponsored the bill to become law. That chairperson will give preference to the people who support the bill. And usually when someone is at last given a chance to oppose the bill and say their piece, if they aren't ridiculed by the chairperson and said that they must actually shut up. And in this case, we had at one of the public hearings, we had a disabled person, this disabled man who opposed the bill. He was there in a wheelchair, and he explained why he doesn't support the bill. And the chairperson kind of cut him off and said, well, you're in a wheelchair. This bill is for your benefit. How can you say these things? And the man thankfully said that, listen, you can't discriminate against me because I'm disabled. He has a right to air his view. But if that doesn't happen, where the committee itself or the majority party on the committee ridicules those who oppose the bill, they will be shouted down by other participants in the audience who are there on behalf of the governing party. So that's a complete sham of the process. That is why a lot of opponents of these measures do not go to these events. And then, unfortunately, and again, it's all a list of unfortunate events. At the public hearings where, for a change, the overwhelming view is oppositional, and we saw it with the tobacco bill, where workers from the, I believe it's the kind of downstream industries of tobacco, came and they said, "Listen, we're not here to talk about public health or about these academic pursuits that the bill is trying to achieve. We work in this industry. You're going to cost us our jobs. This is our livelihood." Those people, when they go and they do their submissions, and that is what that event is characterized by, it is as if it never happened. It is as if that event just never happened. So that is kind of, and then NEDLAC. I mean, the NEDLAC process was a complete sham. People went there. NEDLAC said that they wanted to see the bill. The government said, no, you're not allowed to see the bill. Then eventually the government said, okay, you can go through the bill. NEDLAC went through the bill, proposed where issues are that need to be fixed. The government said, we don't care. The bill is going to go to Parliament unchanged. So that is more or less where we are now. And you'll see in the report, it's a lot of more detail than I've given now. But effectively, it was from the start a fait accompli. The public participation process, top to bottom, has just been the government saying, well, we did speak to the public. But the government never took any heed of what the public said, except those few who did support the bill. So it's a complete democratic sham.
So, I'm looking forward to that report, because I've written quite extensively around the procedure of communicating that these hearings are actually going to take place. And it was quite scary, because Dr. Jacobs, who was the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee of Health in the 6th administration, before they released, or before they even received the bill from Dr. Glormo, who was the deputy health minister, who now is the chairperson of the committee. That's, to me, a very, very, very peculiar move there, and it's unprecedented. I've done my research around that. Is that communicating to the public when these hearings were going to happen and where they were going to happen was within a day or two of the actual hearings taking place. And I quite clearly remember Dr. Jacobs warning the committee of the Machale case, which had just had its ruling from the Constitutional Court, explicitly warning government that they are breaching their own framework. Then the framework was developed in June 2013, highlighting that up to 5 weeks of time needs to be provided to the public of when a hearing was going to take place. So again, all of these stumbling blocks that they have created for themselves will, in my eyes, create a litigious lawsuit that will follow directly after this bill gets signed in. Irrespective of what changes the Portfolio Committee does make to this bill, it's just this entire process has been a shambles. Now, I'm looking forward to the report, as I say, but now let's talk about the latest incident that's happened in this Portfolio Committee, and that is trying to oust a very respected medical doctor who is now an MP, Dr. Letlape, who was the co-founder of the African Harm Reduction Alliance, and the chairperson expressing a concern around the conflict of interest. What is your take? I know that we'll post that link in the comments of this video, but to your opinion piece. But let's thrash that out a bit.
Yeah, look, for me, it's so I have colleagues who have given the government or the chairperson the benefit of the doubt and said, listen, this is actually in line with the rules of parliament. There should be an investigation, etc. I'm a little bit more cynical when it comes to my political warning lights here. Because the fact is that when Dr. Letlape joined Parliament, he declared that he founded this thing. You have to declare when you go into Parliament that you're a member of this and that and the other thing. So that was all there. It's not like this is any kind of surprise really to anyone. and I mean, you noted that the doctor he's a medical doctor, so he kind of knows what he's talking about. He's not this tobacco shill. And
He's
the,
not only a medical doctor, Martin, he's also got a long pedigree in public
exactly,
health. The South
exactly,
African South African, or the Health Professions Council of South Africa, he
yes,
was the head of that.
yeah,
The
yeah. So
World Medical Association, he was the head of that. So
so
he's got
what he brings
is
is,
enormous.
yeah, so he brings credibility to the perspective of not just sycophantically worshipping at the altar of the World Health Organization and saying whatever you want we'll do. He actually says, listen, there's a nuance involved here. Vapes, nicotine pouches, all these things, they're not kind of cure all, but they actually do move the needle somewhat in favor of people abandoning tobacco, which prohibition does not. I mean, just to take a quick sidestep, the COVID-19 pandemic that hit South Africa was followed by one of the strictest lockdowns on the planet that almost destroyed our entire economy. And part of that lockdown was a complete ban on cigarette sales, like total. You cannot go to the shops and buy cigarettes. Did people suddenly say, oh, eureka, I am now no longer a smoker? No, very, very few smokers stopped smoking. They got their cigarettes from the illicit trade, which is now, I mean, it's actually funny for me to call it the illicit trade because it's actually the main tobacco industry today in
It's a
South
monopoly.
Africa. The illicit trade is the tobacco industry now, because the legal, regulated, and taxed tobacco industry represents now only 1/3, a tiny percentage of the tobacco market in this country because of the government overtaxing and overregulating tobacco. So no, the state with the nanny in its guise as a nanny actually doesn't help people abandon tobacco. It just doesn't happen. No matter your intention, no matter how important you really think it is that the state must protect our children from tobacco, etc., and vaping and so forth, it does not work. What does work is harm reduction technologies. It's not ideal. It's not 100% harmless. Nothing in life is 100% harmless, but it is significantly less harmful than tobacco. And it's perhaps the way to break the back of tobacco's kind of dominance of smokers. And yet, so now we have an MP that can say this with authority. Like, he's a medical doctor, long pedigree in public health in this field specifically, and he is on the side of the anti-bills, against the bills, against the bill. That is, I would imagine, very unacceptable to the pro-bill side of things, because they have relied to a very large degree across topics, whether it's on tobacco or COVID-19 or whatever else. They have always said that it's us, the authority on public health, versus these kind of lay people who don't really know what they're talking about. And now suddenly you have Dr. Letlape, a very credible, perhaps the most credible voice in Parliament on this topic specifically, leading the charge against the bill in the committee. And I'm sure that has not impressed the ANC specifically. And of course, now suddenly his directorship of the tobacco harm reduction group is now unacceptable, because now we're at the home stretch of getting this bill through Parliament, getting it signed into law, and giving the Minister of Health this power that he's dreamed of for so long, so that he can go to the Congress of the Parties of the World Health Organization to go and say, look at South Africa being the trendsetter, being the pioneer of kind of prohibitionist tobacco legislation in this country, and Dr. Letlape is standing in the way of that. And it's not just that. Very recently, and look, I have my problems with Dr. Letlape's party, with Actionists. I have big problems with that party. But they introduced a piece of legislation to effectively say that members of Parliament, government officials, etc., they have to, if they use healthcare, they have to use public healthcare. I mean, it's simple. If you're telling us that you're stewarding, as they have said, that the kind of health department is stewarding South Africa's public healthcare sector, and that's why we need to regulate those private clinics and private hospitals because they're not under our stewardship, well, then you certainly have to use public hospitals. And the Action SA legislation is very good in this respect. And of course, that doesn't impress the ANC terribly much, because they understand how they've destroyed the public healthcare sector, and how if a law, because there will be public support for legislation of this kind. Of course, there will be. So this will be egg on the ANC's face, and now they're trying to get kind of undermine these initiatives. And you quickly referred to something earlier that I think is it. To me, it's the most important aspect of this whole thing. The current chairperson of the Health Portfolio Committee on Health, Lomo, he was the Deputy Minister of Health when the tobacco bill was introduced. He went to these events and he defended the legislation. He said that we need this legislation, and he used the word urgently. He said we need it now. It's an important thing for us to do. And now he is the chairman of the committee that is supposed to be a referee and kind of an oversight mechanism on the Department of Health and its legislative proposals. Now, if you appoint in a rugby match someone who has a history of being vociferously pro-Springbok, and you appoint him to be a referee in a game between the Springboks and the All Blacks, you're asking for trouble. You cannot do that. You cannot do that.
Well,
right?
it's the captain of the Springboks who now is the referee against the All Blacks as a Springbok.
Exactly. It's bizarre. And then he and the committee, and again, Parliament's legal services, they've already given at least one presentation that I know of, where they didn't immediately say, listen, this cannot be done. They kept their views open. So I'm regarding them as complicit. They are not pointing out this hypocrisy. You cannot talk about a conflict of interest for Dr. Letlape, who, again, when he joined Parliament, he said, hey guys, I founded this thing. I'm a member of this thing, just so we're all clear. And it's an NGO. He doesn't make any money from it. You cannot then say, oh, there's a conflict of interest because he represents a group that opposes the bill, when the referee, the chairman of the committee, was a sponsor of the bill, who defended the bill on behalf of the executive government, which he is now expected to be an overseer of, and to ensure that this committee's views are kind of ordered, and kind of, he has to make sure that everyone is protected, and all the opponents and the supporters of the bill have their views said. No, that is a conflict of interest. That is a massive conflict of interest. And in my view, it should be a fatal conflict of interest when it comes to the possibility of this bill becoming law. So there's a hell of a lot of hypocrisy going on here, just because of what I would consider a matter of pure ideology. The ANC is concerned that Dr. Letlape is a credible voice against the bill, the most credible voice probably against the bill. And they have no answer to the things that he has said. They never have a good reason to do the bad things that they're doing. I mean, we're talking to a lot of stakeholders who were at Medlac, for instance, and they said we tried to get them to just fix spelling mistakes and incorrectly placed commas, and they wouldn't even hear that. So what possible reason could they have for doing silly stuff, the harmful stuff, harmful to democracy, harmful to the rule of law, stuff like that? They have no reason. They're just marching on with their blinders on. And I think, and I don't have evidence for this, but I think it is because they're getting pressure from international organizations, and they want to be able to go to these upcoming meetings in September, in October, and in November, I think, to go and say, look, we did it, yippee, yippee. That is what they want to do. That's not a good public policy reason. That's not a good constitutional reason for what they're doing. And someone like Dr. Letlape says, listen, actually, I come to these committee meetings with reasons for the things that I am saying. You are not, and they don't have an answer to that, so they're trying to get him off the committee. A brazen assault on South Africa's always precarious democracy.
No, absolutely. I mean, it is. It's. I just can't believe that we can consider the Portfolio Committee of Health as having any power of oversight or holding the Department of Health accountable if the chairperson was the deputy minister of that particular department not so very long ago. I mean, there wasn't any kind of gap. It was literally, had the elections, he was the deputy minister, is now pushed into this portfolio committee of health, and it's lost. This hypocrisy is lost on everybody. So finally, what do you think is going to happen here? How do you think this is going to play out?
Look, I said before, I'm a little bit more cynical than many of my colleagues. I think that this thing is gonna become law, sooner or later, I should say. I think so. The bill was first mentioned in 2016, and then nothing happened. In 2018, something kind of popped out. Then it went through some kind of a process and went silent for a very long time, up until 2022, when I can't even talk about the current process because everything is so chaotic that I actually couldn't say. But the current process started in 2022, and it seems like they're in a rush now. But it's not impossible that the bill can't make it. That they kind of shelve it and say, well, the process has been so fraught with chaos and just brazen violations. Again, the Mogale City judgment that you refer to, brazen violations of established law and at least of established convention, which is also important, that we actually, let's just leave it and focus on something else for a moment, like the equally disastrous NHI. That could happen. The ANC doesn't have a majority in parliament anymore since last year's general election. There are, I think, good voices against the bill, some from the Democratic Alliance, even some from the EFF and MK, for instance. So it's no longer a guaranteed adoption of that legislation. I don't have that much faith in that part of the democratic process necessarily. I think a lot of these parties can be bribed quite easily, kind of, you give us this and we'll give you something else. So I'm not going to put too much faith in that. But I do think some form of this bill will become law, just because of we both referred to it earlier, the way that the tobacco industry and smokers have been maligned in society. It's a very unpopular thing to be seen to be on the side of smokers. So I think that the bill can probably be amended if the ANC sees that it doesn't have the votes to get the bill through in its current form, and then some form of it will become law. So we at the FMF have long said that one of the problematic aspects is that it merges smoking and vaping regulation, and this is, in our view, kind of, these things don't belong together, to kind of treat nicotine and tobacco smoke as the same as flavored vapes, because whenever there's a prohibition on smoking, it's also a prohibition on vaping. We think that's a problem, but it seems like there is a clear desire for these things to go together, and that legislation of this nature is almost seen as imperative by the public health establishment in South Africa's executive and parliament. So I think a form of this thing is going to become law. Now, then I do hope that what you said earlier is correct, and I think it might be, that there will be legal challenges, at least on the process, just because of how impossibly ridiculous it's been so far, but also on the substance. I spoke about the criminalization of kind of people's homes earlier. That is a very clear attack on privacy. I mean, the Constitutional Court not so long ago affirmed a High Court decision that said that you're now allowed to smoke marijuana inside your own house. It defended the sanctity of the home, to say that, in fact, drug laws do not pierce that far. You are in your house; it's your castle. You have a right there as a human being with dignity to do these things in your house. So I think that this bill criminalizes the home. That aspect at least would have to be declared unconstitutional. And then various other kind of weird things. The monitoring committee that is being established is, I mean, you can read it in one way and see, okay, it's an advisory institution. But I think if you really pay attention to the language of the bill, this is I mean, it's an almost a supra governmental organization that has the right to create its own regulations, adopt its own regulations, enforce its own regulations. I mean, this is a real misnamed institution that almost is guaranteed to be staffed by anti-tobacco, anti-smoking it says experts, but also people with experience in the field. So activists, unfortunately, and this is going to be a very democratically and constitutionally problematic institution that I also think there's a chance that it would be found to be an unconstitutional institution if there were to be litigation. So I think that's going to be the process over the next while. Currently, it's still in the committee. It's anyone's guess when it's going to leave the committee. I don't currently think that the ANC has the votes on the committee. I think it can get it quite easily, unfortunately, and then it's going to go to the National Assembly, where all of Parliament will have to vote on it. It is a section 76 bill, I think. Mm-hmm. That means that the National Council of Provinces will also need to vote on it. Don't put any trust in that the National Council of Provinces will repeat what the National Assembly does. And then it's going to go to the president, where we will certainly be lobbying for the president to send it back to Parliament or to refer to the Constitutional Court. But this president is not a supporter of the rule of law in any real sense of the word. So I think he will assent to it, and it will become an act of Parliament. I can't give a timeline on that, but that is at that moment when I hope and trust that there will be litigation that presses back against this. Because while it is unpopular to be seen to be pro-tobacco and so forth, there is no democratic mandate for this law. No party in our Parliament has gone to the electorate during an election and said that we are going to ban tobacco, we're going to ban smoking, we're going to do this and that and the other thing, please vote for us. This has never crossed the mind of any voter in this country. This is simply a kind of rote implementation of the ideology of international organizations, and that to me is profoundly undemocratic. So we do need to get to a point where this legislation is either abandoned or declared to be unconstitutional. That's certainly what we at the Free Market Foundation will be striving towards, not because we're smokers, not because we hate public health, but ultimately because consumer freedom, consumer choice, and the freedom of adults to make their own decisions is a absolutely necessary part of a free society, and that's what we should strive for South Africa to be.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. van Staden. It was a great chat. I'm looking forward to that report. You said it was coming out at the end of the month or in October?
There will be two reports. One is on the process, and one is on what we deem to be unconstitutional provisions of the bill, and they will be released through October into November. So yeah, please keep an eye out for them.
Will do. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day.
You too. Cheerio.
Cheers.